The morning sun pierced through the dense, polluted skyline as Dr. Mia Lawson scanned her computer screens at the Solar Observation Lab. Her fingers tapped nervously on the keyboard, her eyes darting between graphs showing sudden spikes in solar activity. This wasn't just another flare. It was an anomaly, a massive storm brewing on the surface of the sun, ready to unleash havoc on Earth. She glanced over at her colleague, Lucas, who watched in stunned silence, the color draining from his face as the data became increasingly clear. Mia's pulse quickened as she double-checked the data. The solar flares were escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. They only had days, maybe hours, before the planet would be blanketed in an electromagnetic storm capable of shorting out every electronic device on the surface. Power grids would fail, satellites would fall silent, and humanity would be plunged into darkness. Lucas finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. This could end everything. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reached for the intercom, the weight of her next words heavy in her mind. The world needed to know what was coming. But how would they react? Would they even believe her? She pressed the button, her voice shaky but resolute. "This is Dr. Mia Lawson at the Solar Observation Lab. We have an urgent message. Please prepare to implement global blackout protocols immediately." The announcement echoed through the empty halls of the lab. Minutes later, the lab's alarms blared, alerting staff and triggering emergency protocols. Researchers ran through the hallways, panic in their eyes, gathering their belongings as they prepared to leave the facility. Mia watched them disappear, feeling a pang of isolation. She knew that when the storm hit, society as she knew it would cease to function. Only a handful of people understood the gravity of this event, and fewer still knew how to survive it. Mia took one last look at her computer screen, the final unsettling image of the sun's massive corona etched into her mind. She shut down the equipment, knowing it would be the last time anyone saw these readings for a long, long time. Taking a deep breath, she left the lab behind, the realization settling in her mind. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was the beginning of the end. Mia moved briskly through the quiet streets, the failing light casting long shadows across the empty buildings around her. Traffic lights flickered sporadically, and a few abandoned cars littered the street, left behind by drivers who had fled in confusion. She'd never seen the city like this, on the edge of collapse, with confusion and fear palpable in the air. A few pedestrians wandered in a daze, their faces pale and filled with unease as they glanced at darkening windows and silent skyscrapers. As Mia approached her apartment, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Rivera, standing outside, looking helplessly at a non-responsive cell phone. "Doctor?" "Lawson, do you know what's happening?" she called, her voice laced with worry. Mia hesitated, not sure how much to reveal. It's a solar storm, Mrs. Rivera. The power may be out for a while. You should stock up on water and supplies if you can." Mrs. Rivera's face turned white as she absorbed the news, clutching her phone tighter as if it might suddenly spring to life. Mia locked the door, feeling a sense of isolation as she surveyed the emergency supplies she'd managed to gather. The soft glow from her window cast faint shadows across the room as she prepared for the storm's impact. Even with her scientific expertise, the uncertainty gnawed at her. She knew the darkness outside was more than just the failing light. It was the unknown of how society would react when the world went silent. As night fell over the city, a hushed darkness blanketed the skyline. The power grid's failure rippled through the streets, leaving buildings silhouetted against the dim glow of the fading sunset. Here and there, A few lights flickered before finally winking out, plunging whole blocks into silence. People lingered in the streets, staring up at the darkened windows, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. Inside her apartment, Mia heard the hum of her generator sputter and die, marking the final connection to the city's power. She'd expected it. Yet the silence still felt unsettling, amplifying the unease that hung in the air. She walked to the window and watched as the few remaining lights in her building flickered and vanished one by one, leaving the neighborhood in total darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the only sound breaking the silence of a city brought to its knees. Mia stepped cautiously onto the empty street, her flashlight casting a narrow beam that cut through the thick darkness. Shadows stretched across the pavement, and every noise, an echo of distant voices, the shuffle of footsteps, seemed amplified, adding to the feeling of isolation. She knew she wasn't alone in this city, but right now, the streets felt abandoned, like the world had shrunk down to her and the dim circle of light in front of her. As Mia cautiously approached the city square, she saw a small group huddled around a makeshift fire. Their faces flickered in the red glow, shadows dancing with the flames as they whispered amongst themselves. Some looked panicked, others desperate, with one person clutching a small radio in frustration, tapping it in vain hope for a signal. Mia watched from a slight distance, absorbing their fear and confusion as it mirrored her own, wondering how long they could all last in this fragile state of order. As Mia observed the group, a sudden commotion shattered the tense silence. Nearby, two people began arguing over a backpack. Its owner clutched it desperately as others reached toward it, their voices rising with desperation. The flickering firelight cast jagged shadows over their faces, accentuating the fear and distrust in the air. Mia took a step back, her heart pounding as she realized how quickly fear was taking hold. This wasn't just a blackout anymore. It was the start of something darker. Mia slipped away from the group, moving carefully through a shadowed alley, her footsteps barely audible against the silence. She glanced over her shoulder, watching the tense gathering recede into the distance, their desperate whispers and arguments fading. As the red glow from the fire cast eerie shadows around her, Mia felt the weight of isolation and danger pressing in, her mind racing with the need to find a safer place before more chaos erupted. Mia continued down the deserted street, stepping cautiously over debris and maneuvering around abandoned cars scattered in disarray. Her flashlight illuminated patches of the ground, but the shadows stretched long and ominous from the faint red glow of distant fires. The city had become an alien landscape, stripped of its familiar sounds and order, replaced by silence and the constant feeling of eyes watching from the darkness. Mia's heart raced as she entered the familiar suburban neighborhood. Many homes were dark, windows hastily boarded up, evidence of neighbors attempting to prepare for the unknown. She approached one house in particular, her own. Relief mixed with anxiety as her flashlight revealed sandbags piled near the door and faint emergency lights flickering inside. She took a deep breath, hoping her family was safe inside, but bracing herself for whatever lay beyond that door. Inside the dimly lit living room, Mia embraced her family, her partner and young daughter, relief flooding through her as they clung tightly to each other. The room was lit by faint red emergency lights, casting deep shadows that mingled with the scattered supplies around them. Water jugs, canned food, blankets, and flashlights hastily arranged for survival. As they held on, she could sense the fear in their expressions, knowing that the hardest part of the journey had only just begun. Around a small table, Mia spread out a worn map, her finger tracing routes and possible safe zones. Her partner listened intently, and her daughter clutched a flashlight, her wide eyes fixed on her mother. The red glow from the emergency light cast long shadows across their faces, intensifying the sense of urgency. They discussed the challenges of gathering resources and remaining safe amidst the chaos. With each word, Mia felt the weight of her responsibility grow. She was now not only a scientist but her family's guide through the uncertain days ahead. With supplies packed tightly into backpacks, Mia and her family ventured out at dawn. The once bustling neighborhood lay silent, transformed by the blackout into an eerie wasteland. Mia led the way, her face resolute but cautious, glancing back often to check on her partner and daughter. They moved quietly, listening for any sounds that could signal danger. As they walked, the distant, smoldering red glow cast shadows around them, a constant reminder of the chaos gripping the city. The group paused near an old, boarded-up building, hoping to rest. Just as they settled, Mia heard shuffling from the shadows. She motioned her family to stay quiet, reaching for a makeshift weapon. Slowly, a figure emerged, a young man carrying a radio. His appearance was disheveled, but he didn't seem hostile. After a tense moment, he offered a nervous smile and spoke. "I'm just looking for safe passage out of here, same as you." The unexpected ally brought both hope and suspicion. After days of tense travel, Mia and her family reached the rumored safe zone, an abandoned warehouse surrounded by other survivors. Relief washed over them as they joined others seeking refuge. But safety came with difficult choices. The leader of the group offered Mia a place in their inner circle, where she could help make decisions and ration supplies. However, it would mean taking risks for the group's welfare rather than her family's alone. Mia faced a gut-wrenching decision: embrace leadership in this new world, or leave and protect her family at all costs. As night fell, Mia and her family stood on a hill overlooking the warehouse settlement, their final refuge in a world that had grown unfamiliar and brutal. The distant hum of voices below was a stark reminder of what they'd endured to survive this far. Clinging to her daughter's hand, Mia gazed out over the horizon, where the faint glow of fires marked the ruins of cities that once thrived. Her husband placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his face somber as he looked out alongside her. They had come to this point, a small family standing on the precipice of what used to be civilization. The radio they'd salvaged had fallen silent days before, leaving them cut off from any news of recovery or hope. Mia knew that they would never find the life they had lost. Mia took a deep breath and, with a sense of finality, embraced her daughter. There was no more journey, no safe haven beyond the hill. They were a family in the face of the unknown, bound together as they braced for whatever lay ahead. The faint breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the last sounds of the world as it fell into silence, leaving only the echo of their memories and the enduring strength that bound them.